You can already see the depth of that trench has changed though. Like, that trench is nowhere near what it was before. Welcome back to another video in our Green Thumb gardening series. Today we're going to talk about building soil. And we'll start with our best and most rigorous method, double digging. When building soil, you're focusing on two things: loosening your soil and adding organic matter. Double digging is the powerhouse of both. It actually comes from an old tradition of loosening soil 3 feet deep called trenching and bastard trenching. The most powerful method you could use to build your soil and loosen it. It's a wonderful method. Let's get going.
First, loosen the top foot of soil in the area you intend as a bed with a digging fork and clear it of weeds. I'm working here in a previously double dug bed. If you're working in soil that is not previously double dug, your loosening might look more like this. If sod is present, smother it far enough in advance that it sufficiently degrades into the soil or remove it. If you have enough lead time, you have more options for the former. For more information, see our post on our website on dealing with sod.
This foot that steps down is just basically barely carrying my weight, keeping all my weight on my back foot. Don't step in the row.
Second, amend the entire area of the bed with a 2-inch layer or more of cured compost applied right on top. Don't worry about mixing it into the soil at this point. It'll get mixed in naturally during the trenching process.
And then just spread that compost out evenly. And shovel any around to reposition as needed if it gets too thick in a spot. It's hard to rake. But generally just get it, about shaped like the bed was. And that's it.
Third, starting at one end of the bed, dig a 1 foot deep and 1 to 2 foot wide trench that runs the width of the bed. Pile the removed soil just out of the way at the other end of the bed. You want it near enough to be easily shoveled back into the final trench, but out of the way enough to give room for you to walk and step while digging trenches on that end of the bed. A wheelbarrow and a tarp make this and a couple of the latter steps easier. The wheelbarrow makes moving the soil to the other end easier. Buckets, garden tubs, old galvanized wash basins, or the like work fine. They just take a bit more hefting. While you're putting in the work, it makes sense to make sure your trench reaches a full foot in depth and at least 1 foot to 1.5 feet wide. The digging spade's blade is about 1 foot long, so it's a good measure.
To the depth.
And this particular one,
And to the width.
I only did 1 foot wide, just to show why it actually works a little bit better, to have a trench 1.5 feet to 2 feet wide. More on that is explained in another video called Double Digging's Finer Points. Next, add 2 inches or more of cured compost to the bottom of your first trench. And loosen the soil in the bottom of the first trench to the depth of another foot, mixing in the compost naturally as part of that process. Loosening the soil is typically most efficiently accomplished by first inserting the tines and pulling back on the handle in one direction down the length of the entire trench, and then going back perpendicular to that direction and inserting the tines and pulling back on the handle, or rocking and or twisting the tines.
That soil down there is pretty loose. Now I'm going back through with my fork perpendicular to that and starting the mixing process. If you feel any that isn't already loose enough, just go back in and re-go the original direction for a little bit.
You'll notice the soil visibly fluff up during this process. Note that the tines on a typical digging fork are also 1 foot long, making loosing another foot deep possible, and giving you an easy way to check how deep you've gotten. Be sure the compost and existing soil are mixed well and the soil is thoroughly loosened while you have the chance. Gaining access to this depth of soil to loosen it and mix it with the compost is the most difficult part of this method. So once you've done the hard work of making a trench down to this level, do your utmost to improve the soil while you have it exposed.
Some people might leave that first pass at that, and that's fine. Do what you have the stamina for. Knowing you're going to be doing this for the whole bed, but I go back through and just go, at one direction, then across the grain from that direction, and then go back and do the mixing as many times as I need to until when I drop the fork. Actually, I like to get it buried like up to here. when I drop it.
From here on, the process is much the same down the rest of the bed, except that for each next trench you dig, the soil is used to fill the previous trench, naturally mixing in the compost added to the entire bed in the process.
I get access to this next trench by moving the second over into that first one. And it gets loosened just in the act of moving it. And the compost gets mixed in just in the act of moving it.
You can see that because I started with a foot wide as opposed to a 1.5 or 2 foot wide initial trench, I had to take some of the soil from the second trench in a wheelbarrow and place it down on the pile at the other end of the bed.
Clear out that trench.
Again, this and other details are discussed in another video called Double Digging's Finer Points. Whichever way you do it, once your second trench is completed, it's time to add in the compost. And loosen the soil another foot deep with the digging fork, naturally mixing in the compost in the process, just like you did in the first. Continue on this way down the rest of the bed, digging trenches in each adjacent area of bed, using their soil to fill the previous trench. Adding 2 inches of compost to the bottom of each trench. Loosening the soil at the bottom of the trench another foot deep with the digging fork. And so on, down the rest of the bed, until you reach the final trench.
So you won't fill that trench right now.
Then simply fill the final trench with the soil you set aside from the first trench. This is where, having used a tarp to pile the soil, this penultimate step becomes just a little bit easier. The tarp makes moving the last several shovelfuls of soil easier when you add this pile back to the bed toward the end of the process, since it allows you to just simply drag them to the bed and dump them in as soon as they're light enough. Using a tarp also makes final cleanup easier. Once you drag the last bit of soil to the bed and dump it in, you're done with cleanup. There's no final soil to be raked out of the grass or that has filled up space between your mulch, essentially ruining it. You may also have a final wheelbarrow of soil left to dump back in at this point. Just like with the tarp, leaving the last load in there makes it easier. Once all the soil is added back, it's time to shape the bed with a bow rake.
This is just final bed shaping. I'm gonna have to pull more up around these edges here.
And that's it. You're all finished.
As you can see, double digging is intense, both in terms of soil building and in terms of the effort involved, but it pays huge dividends. Plus, luckily, double digging shows its greatest benefits for only a few garden plants, and those that don't take up that much space, but just have really extensive root systems: tomatoes, peppers, and the larger brassicas, broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. So it's not needed over the entire garden, just for the beds in which they're planted. This and other nuances of double digging are explained in our next video on double digging's finer points. For those who can't or don't want to put in the effort involved in double digging, our third video in this series shows our next most intense method, a hybrid option that, although not quite as great as shown in double digging, gives wonderful results. We look forward to the other methods and videos and hope you do too. And until next time, stay open to growing, especially growing soil, and take care.
And as always, check out our Twitter and Instagram. We're using Twitter as a sort of a garden calendar reminder, and our Instagram, pretty much just all the most beautiful photos Jen finds in the garden, coupled with some of the ones I just find timely for when certain parts of the season. By the same token, check out our website for much more information on all of these topics. The website and accompanying book, like these videos, are an attempt to restore and pass on what used to be our birthright, the generationally passed on knowledge of how to grow our own food. I've been dismayed my whole life when watching gardeners struggle for lack of knowledge that used to be passed down so freely it was taken for granted. At their core, these generational secrets to success communicated 3 absolutely critical and 3 accompanying fundamentals that allow us, as gardeners, to grow amazingly healthy and productive produce. It's time we restore that birthright. Also included on the website are a plethora of other little secrets to success, from starting your own seedlings to how to use mulch, from seed and plant selection to dealing with sod. We hope you enjoy them, learn from them, and pass them on. Happy gardening.
they're getting such a fluff on that soil, and this is a previously double dug bed, and we're still getting that fluff of that soil. You can imagine non-double dug stuff, like, it's crazy to think of.